This is Kali Persall, editor of Institutional Investing in Infrastructure, and I'm here today with David Grumhaus, president and CIO of Duff and Phelps Investment Management. We're going to talk about how water infrastructure investment can help address global water crises. But before we go into it, David, can you just give a brief overview of yourself and your role at the firm?
So I am, as you said, the president and chief investment officer at Duff and Phelps Investment Management. We are a real asset boutique based out of Chicago. I've been with the firm about 10 years. And one of my roles here, in addition to my CIO, is I am one of the portfolio managers on the Virtus Duff and Phelps Water Fund.
So, water, as you know, has become a major topic of interest and concern. I just recently actually saw a stat from UNESCO that globally 2 billion people have no safe access to drinking water and 3.6 billion lack access to safely managed sanitation. So just from your point of view, what are some of the key factors contributing to this global water crisis?
Sure. It's when people talk about the water crisis, I think they are immediately drawn to that aspect of it, which is the lack of access people have to clean drinking water and wastewater treatment, especially in poor, more rural countries. But the problem is much, much greater than that. So we are seeing a large and growing gap between the supply of water and demand for water. We expect water demand to double over the next 20 years. And it's important to understand when we talk about water that only 3% of the world's water is fresh water, and 2/3 of that is tied up in glaciers. So we really only have sort of 1% of the overall water in the world that is usable. With that demand growing, what we're seeing is that you're going to have a situation by 2030 where demand is outpacing supply by almost 40%. Now, this is being driven by population growth. It's being driven by urbanization. It's also being driven by just chronic underinvestment in water and water infrastructure in the United States and Europe, across Asia. So it's a very big problem. I think the other thing I would say is climate change is absolutely exacerbating this problem. Certainly the warmer temperatures that we've seen is having a significant impact on agriculture, and agriculture makes up 70% of water usage. But it's also the fact that most climate change events are water related. So you think droughts, you think hurricanes, you think floods, all of this really comes back to water.
I understand your firm has decades of experience in listed real assets and water-related investments. With that background in mind, I would love to talk about the case for investing in water infrastructure companies. What opportunities does this present in your view?
We think investing in water offers the opportunities to invest in a tremendous secular growth story. And we think this is a growth story that's not just going to play out over the next couple of years. It's going to be over the next couple decades. Literally trillions of dollars need to be invested in water infrastructure across the globe. If you look at water, even whether you look at over the last 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, investments in water have outperformed both the S&P 500 and the ACWI. And we very much think that this is going to continue. And one of the things about water is one of the things we always hear is that, well, I can get my water exposure through passive investing if I own an index fund. But, if you look at the S&P 500, the component of water exposure within the S&P 500 is only about 1.5%. So we definitely think having a dedicated investment in water makes a lot of sense. It also brings really nice diversification to a portfolio. Finally, I would say there's an important sustainability aspect to water. We think the investment case absolutely stands on its own, but for certain investors may also be drawn to the sustainability benefits as well.
So as you mentioned, trillions of dollars need to be invested across the globe, and needs are getting greater. As we said, it's not just drinking water. Now we're thinking about, increasing digitization, the rise of AI. What are some of these things? How do they factor into your general outlook for the water infrastructure sector? And what are some of your expectations going forward?
Sure. So, when I think about water, you have big global infrastructure investments that need to be made to improve connectivity, water quality, wastewater treatment. You have a lot of technology investments needed to enhance water supply, water efficiency, and water quality. And on top of that, you have sort of four things that are going on currently that I would point to that's just creating an even bigger demand. You mentioned AI and data centers. So when you think about AI and data centers, it really starts with semiconductor plants. We've all been reading about the onshoring of plants and the building of new plants in the US. I would note that most of those plants are being built in places like Texas and Arizona, which are already very short water. But a semiconductor plant uses as much water as a mid-sized town on a daily basis. So they're huge users of water. Then you move on to the fact of the data centers themselves. So data centers use about 300,000 gallons of water a day to cool their servers. So they are huge water hogs as well. Second thing I would point to is a renewed focus on overall water quality. So when we think back a couple of years, a lot of this maybe is focused on lead and copper and other contaminants within water, but this is really greatly expanded. The big thing that we've been reading a lot about are PFAS, or the forever chemicals. The EPA has obviously now mandated earlier this year that we need to remove PFAS and get PFAS down to 4 parts per trillion. This is going to require huge investments in testing. It's going to require huge amounts of investment to get the PFAS out of the water and other areas. So that's another area where we're just going to see much greater demand for investment. The third area I would point to is corporate sustainability and corporate realization about the importance of water. As we've seen greater water shortages, as we've seen more climate type events, corporations have seen their businesses greatly impacted by a lack of access to water. Companies are realizing just important how water is. A lot of them are outsourcing their water needs to some of the companies that we invest in. I think there's also a greater focus on companies and the importance of water to their overall sustainability practices. And something that we first heard about, obviously, was companies wanting to get to net zero on carbon. Now we're seeing companies want to get to net zero on their water targets as well. Finally, I would point to government support and subsidies. So we've had, 4 big bills get passed in the last couple of years. We had the IIJA, we had the CHIPS Act, we had the IRA bill, right? Each of these has a substantial amount of water dedicated investments that are within the bills. And we're starting to see some of these dollars now get released and get put to work and invested. And again, that's really benefiting a lot of the companies that we're investing in through the water sectors.